Hi, my name is Marci Littlefield, and today I'm going to talk about my project, Why Reparations Still Matter. When we think about uh, just the nationwide call for racial justice is inspired by the deaths of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor. It's really a sign that the United States has really not reckoned with the consequences of racial slavery. The Black Lives Matter movement protest witness on the world stage demands that we all take notice to the glaring inconsistency in our system of justice. And it really asks the question, do Black and Brown lives matter? These protests also ask a really a more fundamental question, one that cuts at the very core of basic American principles and values. Do we really believe in democracy? Do we really believe in freedom? Do we really believe in equality? We are at a true crossroad in our society, and this project is about thinking about how can we continue to think about why reparations still matter. And as a society, we have to decide, how do we live up to the promise of America? And how do we deal with a lot of the inconsistencies that we continue to face as a nation? The whole case for reparations was made quite clearly by Tanisha Coates, who wrote in in the Atlantic Monthly magazine um, about why Black Americans have continued to experience racial inequality in the United States. He discusses 20 years of slavery, 90 years of Jim Crow, 60 years of separate but equal, 35 years of redlining. And he really makes the case that because of all these things, these represent the consequences of racial slavery in the United States. And these consequences continue to exist. And and this is how he makes the case for reparations. We continue to see how the Black Lives Matter movement also makes that case for reparations because of how Black people have been treated in our criminal justice system. When we think about just the whole history of slavery, the whole history of slavery, the transatlantic slave trade around the continent, what we see is that Great Britain had a huge part in the context of slavery and what happened. And while the United States uh, has not given reparations, Great Britain has really looked carefully at their role in the slave trade and what has happened as a consequence of the legacy of slavery. And there's been a lot of research that they've done in Britain to consider just the whole cost of slavery to the British economy. And part of what they concluded in one of the articles discussed that the British government borrowed 20 million to compensate slave owners, which amounted to a massive 40% of the Treasury's annual income, or about 5% of the British GDP. This loan was one of the largest in history. And part of just doing the research to come up with the debt owed because of slavery is part of how Great Britain is thinking about how they can actually make reparations for slavery. Part of how Great Britain sees their role in slavery is that the legacies of slavery continue to shape life for descendants of the formerly enslaved and for everyone who lives in Britain, whatever their origin. The legacies of slavery in Britain are far from off. They are in front of our eyes every single day. And it goes on to say that a nation that doesn't understand its own history and the roots of its wealth will struggle to understand how power, finance, politics, and economies work. A nation that doesn't understand its past can't understand its present and how the legacy of slavery and empire remain at the heart of British life today. And so that's part of just the whole case for why those in Great Britain, why Great Britain is making reparations for slavery in a number of ways, which also include giving money to some of their colonies. Jamaica, for instance, received money for the university, as well as they've some of the universities have given scholarships to descendants of the slave trade, and in other ways. And what we see in the United States is that we continue to not also do what Great Britain has done. The United States continues to to operate in a racial caste system, which leaves African Americans left out and other minorities left out of the American dream. And what we see in terms of how the United States is organized, that we are currently living in a racial caste system. And that's part of just this whole context of why, of when we think about how America is organized and what has happened in this country. The fact that the United States is a country which has relied on white privilege and has given certain groups privilege while other groups don't have privilege is also a consequence of racial slavery. We can see differences between whites and blacks and Latinos in terms of unemployment, in terms of income, and all of these things really fuel the context for thinking about why we should reconsider reparations and why our economy is in need of a true overhaul. The 1619 Project was a project which really was organized to give some context and understanding to what was happening in 1619, which is when the first slave ship arrived to America. And this project, which was created by the New York Times, Nicole Hannah-Jones was a lead writer, and she told a lot of stories about what happened in 1619, and it was extremely controversial just because of how historians saw some of the claims that were made in this project. Some historians did not agree with the connection between slavery and the American Revolution, and this caused a lot of controversy. And I think this controversy is also part of the context of the fact that we are, as Americans, we are unwilling to accept our role in slavery as a society and the real consequences of what it had for African Americans. So when we think about just our founding fathers, and this is part of what the 1619 Project highlighted, when we think of our founding fathers and ideas about liberty and equality, that was never realized for African Americans. It was never realized for those who were considered to be not white in this country. And so when we think about just why the case for reparations needs to be made and why we still need reparations, you can look at the current circumstances in our country. We are a divided country. We are two societies where some people have resources and some people don't. And part of that problem has to do with how we were founded and the fact that the United States has never been willing to address the true nature of slavery, the impact of slavery, have a real discussion, an honest discussion of what happened with slavery and the consequences that have happened for people of color and all people as a result of that legacy that we continue to ignore and not really give a full discussion and a reality check of what needs to happen. And when we think about where we go in the future, and how some of this change has to happen in our country and the way we hope our country will be better than it has been, we have to take a real look of where we started. And that's why that's why the case for reparations is important and should happen.